Now that we've set up the code to add places, we need to be able to show the places that our user has added. So let's go down and fill in the show places function here. The first thing I want to do is update the places stored number here so we can show how many places we have in the database. I'll use document getElementById, and we're looking for a span tag called numPlaces. I'll set the inner HTML equal to count. Now after we've updated that number, below that I'd like to add in a list of all the places and the data that we have stored for it. Since we don't know how many places my user has added to the array, this is a good place to use a for loop. So let's set that up. I'll start off with my for keyword, then we need a counting variable. I'll use I again. We'll set it equal to 0 to start. We'll have our for loop continue as long as I is less than count. And I'll update my I variable by 1 by using the plus plus operator. We'll set up grouping braces for our for statement. And then inside there, I'm going to want to update all the different variables. I think what we'll do is we'll keep track of an output again, and we'll just add to it with each one of the variables that we put in. I'll start the variable up here outside of the for loop. I'll just call it place data. And we'll set it equal to quote quote, which is actually an empty string at the very beginning. Now once inside the loop, we'll take that same variable place data and we'll add on to it the name for starters. We'll use plus equals so it adds right on to the end. And the first thing I'll do is put labels for each one. We'll have name first, a colon and a space, and then we'll close those quotes, and add on to it the variable that we're going to get from our places array. Remember, we're looping through the array, so I'm going to use square brackets here and put my I variable inside of the brackets. That'll grab whatever name the for loop is on. Now before we finish this off, I'm going to add on a line break as well. Now we want to add on each one of the fields that we have here, so we'll want one for notes, latitude, and longitude as well. I'll copy this line that we've got in here and paste it in 3 more times. And we'll update it with our other variable names. For instance, this is going to be notes. And we'll use the notes array. The next one will be latitude. And we'll use the latitudes array. And the last one will be longitude, and we'll use the longitudes array. I'll make this last one 2 line breaks so that we have an extra space in between places. We'll copy that and paste it in again. Now after our function has run through the entire array and assembled our place data, we need to put it onto the page. So let's place it into the stored places div that we have here. I'll just go right down to the bottom of our for loop, and we'll use document getElementById, and we'll set it up to stored places, and set the inner HTML equal to our place data variable. Now the only thing we need to do is call our show places function, and a great place for that is up here inside of our init places. So let's add that to the bottom of that function. Now let's go over how this is going to work. First, when my window loads, we try to figure out if our user's browser can handle storage. If it can't, we give them an alert message, and if it can, we call the initPlaces function. That sets up local variables from all of our local storage variables, if we have anything stored there, and calls the showPlaces function. ShowPlaces loops through our entire array and assembles all the data for each place, as well as updating the places stored number here at the top. And of course, we have our addPlaces function, which grabs all the data out of our fields and pushes it into our local arrays first, and then into our local storage. Let's try it all out. I'm going to save all of our changes, and let's go over to our browser and refresh the page. I don't see any big changes at the start. So let's see if we can add a place. I've already done the get location, so let me just give it a place name. And we'll give it some notes. I'll click the Add a Place button. And there we can see our first stored place. We've got a nice listing there. Now let's just simulate a second stored place. I'll leave the same note, just click Add a Place again, and you can see now I'm listing the second place here as well. And since we're using local storage data, I can close the browser completely and go back and open up Favorite Places again. And it still has my same data. Now to finish out our little app, I want to do a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to remove the latitude and longitude, since that isn't very useful to most people, and replace that with a link to a Google's map. The second thing is to set up the Clear All Places so our user can manage the places that they've saved. So let's go back to our document. First, I'll set up the Clear Places function since it's right here. We're just going to call localstorage.clear, and that'll remove all of our data. Then, if we want the page to refresh, I'll just set up a document.location.reload function and pass it a value of true. You can use this whenever you want JavaScript to refresh the page for you. Now let's go take a look at our show places function. I'm not going to need these two lines anymore, so I'll just comment them out for now. And what I'd like to do instead is first put together the latitude and longitude so that it matches the Google format, and then set up the map URL. I'll make a variable for lat_long, and we'll set that equal to the right element from the latitudes array. We'll use our I variable again. Then we're going to add in a comma to separate the two, so we put that in quotes. And then we're going to add in the longitudes array element. Now we can add in our map URL for Google Maps. That's going to be a long string, and it equals http://maps.googleapi.com/maps/API/static map, and then we're going to have a question mark for the data, center equals. And this is where we close our quotes because we need to add in our map URL coordinates, lat_long. Then we can add in the end of the statement. I'll start it off with quotes, and we'll use ampersand markers to add a marker at our spot. I'll set that equal to color blue. We need to use the %7c separator, and we'll add in a label of 1. Then %7c again, and I'll close my quote because we're going to add in our lat_long variable again. That tells Google Maps where to put the marker. Finally, we add in the end of the statement, which sets the zoom, the size, and the sensor variables. That'll be &zoom equals 14. You can change that value depending on your map location. And then I'll set a size of 300 by 400. So it fits our mobile app screen. Lastly, I'll set sensor equals false. We'll close up my quotes and close up the statement. And now we have our map URL, which is the first part of our Google Maps address, plus the lat_long, where we want the map to be located, and then information for the markers, the zoom, and the size of the window. The last thing we want to do is put this all into a link so that our user can click it and go right to the map. And what I'll do is add this right onto place data. We'll use plus equals just like we were doing before, and that'll tack this new script right onto the end of it. And for starters, I need to add in an anchor tag so we have a link. So I'll start off with quotes from my string and add in the tag A with an attribute of href equals. And then we need quotes inside of this HTML statement. So I'm going to use single quotes there. And then I'll close that off with double quotes because we're going to add in our map URL. And then we just need to add in the code that's going to close this statement off. So once again, quotes, then a single quote to close my href statement, of course slash and end tag as well. Then we'll add a little text, something like click for map, and then we need to close the A tag completely. And then just so we can have a little space between our places, I'll add 2 line breaks at the end of that. We'll grab them from up here. And then I can close my quotes. And since this is a big long line, I better check it out. I've got my map URL with the first part of it, plus the latitude and longitude. Then I've got my markers, and latitude and longitude for my markers, and looks like I'm missing a quote there, as well as an equal sign here for size. It's a good idea to check these long string statements, especially when you're adding a lot of pieces together. But I think I've got it all now. I think we're about ready to save our changes and test. So let's save our changes here. Let's go back over to our browser and refresh the page. And now you can see we still have our 2 places stored, but instead of the latitude and longitude, we now have a link where we can click for a map, and that takes us to a nice Google Maps page. Now there's really only one more thing that I want to set up for this particular app that we're building, and that is I want to make sure that this looks good on a mobile environment. So I'm going to go up to my page here, and at the very top I'm going to add one more important statement into the head tag. This is a meta tag, and I'll set the name equals viewport, and the content equals width equals device-width. That one meta tag at the top will tell all of your phone devices to resize this to a full screen and set the content width to whatever the device width size is. Now let me save our change, and if I refresh the page here, we won't see any changes at this point, but if you check this out on your phone or mobile device, you'll see that instead of a tiny version of your web page, it'll zoom up to fill the whole screen. Well, that brings us to the end of our series. I hope I've given you enough to set you on your way for your own experiments with your own websites. As you can see, there's still a lot to learn. We've only scratched the surface of some of the new features, and there's a lot of depth to JavaScript that you can still explore, as well as other frameworks like jQuery and jQuery Mobile. So the most important thing is to keep practicing and keep learning.